Jack had always been a man of routine. He woke up every morning before sunrise, worked in the fields, and then spent his afternoons at the local market, selling whatever crops he could spare. Life on this distant planet was tough, but Jack had made a home for himself in the small colony. It was simple, peaceful, and he had everything he needed. Or so he thought. One bright afternoon, as Jack was finishing his work for the day, he noticed something unusual. A woman, or at least he thought she was a woman, was sneaking around the edge of his cart. She moved quickly, almost like she didn't want to be seen. Jack had seen his fair share of hungry travelers, but something about her made him stop. She was unlike anyone he had seen before. Her skin was a strange shade of blue, and her clothes were tattered, hanging loosely from her thin frame. She appeared disheveled, her eyes wide and full of fear. Jack squinted, trying to make sense of the situation, but before he could take another step, she reached into his cart and grabbed a loaf of bread. In one swift motion, she darted away, disappearing behind a pile of crates. Jack stood frozen for a moment, shocked by what he had just witnessed. It took him a second to snap out of his disbelief, and then he was moving, quickly closing the distance between himself and the mysterious woman. As he rounded the corner, he saw her again, this time kneeling beside a small child who was huddled. On the ground, the child's face was pale, and its skin was covered in strange markings. Jack could tell right away that something was very wrong. "Hey," Jack called out, his voice sharper than he intended. "What do you think you're doing? You can't just take things without asking." The alien woman looked up, her eyes wide with panic. She quickly pulled the bread closer to herself, as if she were afraid he would take it back. Jack's heart skipped a beat when he saw her hands trembling. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice shaky. "My child, she's sick. I had to get her food she hasn't eaten in days." Jack took a step back, trying to process what he was hearing. The woman was clearly desperate. It wasn't every day that someone would steal from him, but there was something in her eyes that stopped him from getting angry. She wasn't a thief. She was just a mother doing whatever she could to survive. He glanced down at the child. What? Poor thing looked as though it could barely keep its eyes open. Jack didn't know much about alien species, but the child looked sick to be out here in the open. Jack felt a strange sense of compassion building inside him. He'd always prided himself on being fair, on treating others how he would. Want to be treated? Right now he couldn't just walk away from this woman in need. Taking a deep breath, Jack did something he never thought he would. He knelt down, reaching into his bag. "Here," he said softly, holding out a second loaf of bread. "Take this. You need it more than I do." The woman's eyes widened, and she hesitated for a moment, looking at him like she didn't quite believe what was happening. She then slowly reached out, taking the bread from his hand. Her fingers brushed against his, and for a moment Jack thought she might say something more. But she didn't. She just took the bread and clutched it to her chest, her eyes filling. With tears, "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack stood up, watching as she turned to feed the bread to her child. The small alien creature ate slowly, nibbling on the bread as though it was the first meal it had had in days. Jack could feel a wave of sympathy wash over him. No one should have to live like this, especially not a mother with her child. "Are you ... from around here?" Jack asked, his voice gentle but curious. The woman nodded, but there was a sadness in her expression. "No, we come from another world, my people. We were forced to leave when the war came. Now we are just refugees, struggling to survive." Jack furrowed his brow. He'd heard rumors of wars between alien species, but he didn't know much about them. Still, hearing her story made him realize just how little he knew about the struggles beyond his small colony. To him, the alien woman was a stranger. Yet in this moment, she felt just like any other mother trying to care for her child. "Where are you going?" Jack asked, his voice softening. "We don't know," she replied. "We just try to find food wherever we can. My people are scattered across this planet. Some of us survive, but many don't. The ones that do, they're always on the run." Jack felt his heart ache. He could see the pain in her eyes, and for a moment, He couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to live in constant fear, always wondering if there would be enough to eat or a safe place to rest. It wasn't a life anyone should have. To live. "Well," Jack said after a long pause, "I don't have much, but if you ever need anything, you can come to me. I'll help, however I can." The woman looked up at him, her face filled with disbelief. She opened her mouth, as if she wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, she simply nodded, grateful beyond measure. "I don't understand why you would do this," she said quietly. "Most people, ... they would have called for the guards." Jack gave a small smile, his heart lightened by her words. "Not everyone," he replied. "Not everyone is like that." As Jack stood there, watching the alien mother and her child eat the bread, he realized that this simple act of kindness had changed something in him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he couldn't turn away from those in need, no matter where they came from. The next few days were quiet, but Jack couldn't stop thinking about the alien woman and her child. Her name was Yara, and she had looked at him with such disbelief when he had shown her kindness. Jack had always been a man of routine, but helping her had felt right. It was like he had done something important, something that went beyond the daily struggles of survival. He didn't know why it felt so significant. As the sun began to set one evening, Jack finished his work in the fields and decided to head toward the marketplace. It had been a few days since he'd seen Yara, and he wondered how she and her child were doing. He didn't know where they were staying, but something told him he needed to find out. Jack walked through the market, nodding at familiar faces. But his mind kept drifting back to Yara. He finally found himself standing at the edge of the marketplace, looking out at the dusty path that led into the nearby hills. That's when he saw her again. Yara was standing near a pile of rocks, her child in her arms. They were still dressed in rags, and Yara's face was thin, as though she hadn't eaten enough in days. The child looked much weaker now. Jack felt a tug in his chest. He knew he couldn't just ignore them. Taking a deep breath, Jack walked up to Yara. She looked up in surprise when she saw him, her eyes still filled with the same confusion and gratitude that he had seen the other day. But this time, there was something more in her expression: fear. It was clear she was trying to protect her child, but Jack could also see that she wasn't sure if she could trust him again. "You're still here," Jack said, trying to sound casual, though he was anything but. Yara nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "We don't have anywhere else to go." Jack felt a sharp pang of sympathy. He had his own small home, but he had never had to struggle the way she was. He could see that she was at the end of her rope. "You don't have to stay out here in the open. Come with me. I have a place where you and your child can rest. It's not much, but it's safe." Yara looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with hesitation. "But you've already given us food. Why would you help us again?" Jack smiled softly. "We've got enough. No one should have to live like this. You and your child deserve better. Just come with me, and I'll make sure you have a place to stay until you figure out what's next." Yara's expression softened. She was still wary, but something in Jack's voice made her trust him. Slowly, she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jack led Yara and her child back to his small house, which was on the outskirts of the settlement. The place wasn't much, just a simple one-room cabin, but it was clean and had enough space for the three of them. It wasn't much, but to Yara, it felt like a safe haven. When they arrived, Jack quickly set up a small fire in the corner of the room. He handed Yara some fresh water and a blanket for her child. She looked at the small setup with wide eyes, almost as if she couldn't believe she was being treated with such care. "This is too much," Yara said, shaking her head. "It's not too much," Jack replied firmly. "You need rest, and your child needs food. I'm not going to turn you away, not after what I saw." Yara sat down carefully, her child still in her arms. She gave Jack a small, hesitant smile, and for the first time, it seemed like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was still clearly scared, but she no longer seemed as lost as she had when they first met. Over the next few days, Jack did everything he could to help Yara and her child. He gave them food, water, and blankets, and he even took the time to sit and talk with Yara. They didn't speak much about her past. She was still too afraid to share details about her people and their struggles, but Jack could tell that there was a deep sadness inside her. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Jack asked gently, "What happened to your people, Yara? How did you end up here?" Yara looked down at her child, her eyes filling with sorrow. "My people. We were once powerful," she said quietly. "We had a home, a place in the stars. But then we were betrayed. The war came, and we were forced to flee. We've been scattered across the galaxy ever since. Some of us survive, ... but many don't." Jack listened, his heart aching for her. He had heard whispers about war between alien species, but he had never thought it would affect people like Yara. She wasn't a soldier, and neither was her child. They were just survivors, trying to find a way to live. "Where do you go now?" Jack asked softly. Yara hesitated before replying, "I don't know. We've been running for so long, I don't even remember what it's like to feel safe." Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. He had given Yara a place to rest, but he knew that the life she had known was gone forever. She couldn't stay here forever either. The settlers wouldn't let her. The galaxy had rules, and refugees like Yara didn't fit into them. But Jack wasn't thinking about the galaxy. He was thinking about Yara, her child, and the kindness he had shown her. He couldn't help but feel that there was something more he needed to do. He just wasn't sure what it was yet. As the night wore on, Yara rested, her child finally sleeping peacefully. Jack sat by the fire, lost in his thoughts. The journey he had started when he showed mercy to a stranger was only beginning. No matter where it led, Jack knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just turn his back on someone who needed help. The next few weeks passed quietly. Jack kept to his routine, but his thoughts often drifted to Yara and her child. They had settled in with him, and although Jack had given them food and shelter, he knew that their stay wouldn't last forever. Yara's child, whose name was Lyra, seemed to be improving, but Yara still looked worn out, tired from years of running and hiding. Jack did his best to help them, but there was a constant feeling of unease. He knew that Yara and Lyra couldn't stay with him forever, not with the way the galaxy was. There were rumors of military patrols looking for alien refugees, and Jack had a feeling that sooner or later the soldiers would come to this part of the settlement. One evening, after the sun had set and the stars were starting to appear, Jack sat outside on the small porch of his cabin. The cool breeze washed over him as he stared up at the sky. He had always enjoyed the peace of the planet, but now it felt like something was about to change. He heard a rustling sound behind him and turned to see Yara standing at the door. Her eyes filled with worry. "Jack," she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty, "I think we need to leave." Jack stood up immediately. "What do you mean? Is something wrong?" Yara stepped forward, glancing around nervously. "I've been hearing things. There are soldiers in the area. They're looking for us." "I don't want to put you in danger?" Jack's heart sank. He had known that this day might come, but hearing it from Yara made it real. He'd never been involved in anything like this before. His life had been simple, and he liked it that way. But now, he was tangled up in something bigger. He couldn't just send Yara and Lyra away, not after everything he had done for them. "You don't need to worry about me," Jack said, his voice calm but firm. "You and Lyra are my responsibility now. I won't let them take you." Eyes widened in surprise. "But Jack, you're just one person. They have weapons, and they have soldiers. I've seen what they can do. You can't protect us. You can't protect yourself." Jack felt a fire stir inside him. Soldier. He didn't know how to fight wars or outsmart patrols, but he did know how to protect people he cared about. And right now, Yara and Lyra were the most important things in his life. "I don't care about what they have," Jack said, his voice filled with conviction. "I won't let them take you. I'll help you find a way out of here, even if it means risking everything." Yara didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him, as though she couldn't believe what he was saying. After a long moment, she nodded, her expression softening. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Jack smiled gently, trying to reassure her. "You don't have to thank me. Just get ready. We leave tomorrow." But that night, Jack spent hours planning their escape. He didn't know where they could go, but he knew they had to get out of the settlement before the soldiers found them. He had heard of hidden paths through the nearby mountains, places where refugees had disappeared. In the past, it was their only chance. The next morning, Jack woke early, his mind already set on the task ahead. Yara and Lyra were already awake, sitting together in the corner of the cabin. Lyra was holding on to Yara tightly, her small face tired but calm. Jack could tell that Yara hadn't slept much. She had the same haunted look that Jack had seen in her eyes since the day they met. "Are you ready?" Jack asked, trying to sound encouraging. Yara nodded slowly, her hand shaking slightly as she packed the few belongings they had. "Yes, but I'm scared, Jack. I don't know if we'll make it." Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We will make it, promise. You're not alone anymore." The three of them set out early, moving quietly through the fields and out into the forest. Jack led the way, keeping a close eye on the surroundings. He could feel the weight of the danger looming over them, but he kept moving forward, determined to keep Yara and Lyra safe. As they moved deeper into the forest, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. He knew the soldiers were looking for them. He could almost hear the footsteps of their pursuers behind them. But he pushed the fear aside. He couldn't afford to be afraid, not now. Hours passed as they walked through the dense forest, the trees growing taller and thicker around them. Jack led them to a small cave he had heard about from other settlers, a place hidden deep in the mountains, far from prying eyes. It was a dangerous path, but it was their only chance. When they finally reached the cave, Jack breathed a sigh of relief. They were safe, for now. He helped Yara and Lyra inside, and they sat down on the cold stone floor, exhausted from the long journey. Yara leaned back against the cave wall, her eyes closed as she tried to catch her breath. "I never thought I would be running like this again," Yara said softly. "I thought we were finally safe." Jack sat down beside her. "No, but you're safe now. For as long as we can stay here, you're safe." Yara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "I don't know what to say, Jack. You've done so much for us." "I don't deserve this kindness. You do," Jack replied firmly. "Everyone deserves kindness, and as long as I can help, I will." The cave was quiet except for the soft sound of their breathing. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, it felt peaceful, almost as if they were in another world. Jack knew they couldn't stay here forever, but for the moment, it felt like they had found a brief respite from the storm, and for the first time in a long while, Jack allowed himself to relax. There was still a long road ahead, but as he looked at Yara and Lyra, he knew that no matter what happened, he would fight to keep them safe. The days in the cave felt long and quiet. Yara and Lyra had made the best of their temporary hideout. They only ventured out when necessary, keeping to the shadows and avoiding any signs of the military patrols that might be searching. For them, Jack was constantly on edge, aware that they couldn't stay hidden forever. But for now, the cave provided a sense of safety that they hadn't felt in weeks, as the days turned into weeks. Jack found himself growing more attached to Yara and her child. He could see that Yara was doing her best to keep Lyra calm despite her own fears. She had become more open with Jack, sharing pieces of her past little by little. She spoke of the destruction of her home planet, the war that had torn her people apart, and the endless flight from one place to another. But there were still gaps in her story. Jack could tell she was holding back, too afraid to share the worst parts of her past. One evening, as the three of them sat around the small fire they had built inside the cave, Jack noticed that Yara was quieter than usual. She had been staring into the flames for a while, her expression distant and sad. Lyra was asleep on a pile of blankets, curled up next to her mother. Jack decided it was time to talk to Yara, to understand her better. "Yara," Jack said gently, breaking the silence. "I know it's not easy, but I can tell something's weighing on you. If you want to talk about it, I'm here." Yara looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking about my people a lot," she said quietly. "Never wanted to leave them behind. But when the war started, we didn't have a choice. I didn't think I would ever have to say goodbye to everyone I knew, or that I would end up like this, hiding in caves, scared to show myself to anyone." Jack nodded, understanding the pain in her voice. "I can't imagine what that must feel like," he said, "to lose everything you knew and have to keep running, never knowing if you'll find peace. But you're here now, Yara. You've got a chance to rebuild. I'll help you do that. You're not alone." Yara's eyes softened, and for the first time Jack saw a flicker of hope in her expression. She smiled faintly, though it was clear that she was still haunted by the weight of her past. "I never thought I would find someone like you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You've shown me kindness when no one else would. You don't know how much that means to me." Jack shifted slightly, leaning closer to the fire. "It's just the right thing to do. Everyone deserves a chance. You've been through so much already. It's not much, but I can give you a safe place to stay, and I won't stop helping as long as you need me." Yara remained silent for a moment, lost in thought. Then, with a deep sigh, she spoke again, this time with more conviction. "I've been running for so long," she said. "I forgot what it feels like to trust someone. But now I know. I can't do this on my own. And maybe, just maybe, there's a chance for my people after all. I won't give up, Jack. I can't." Jack reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to give up. We'll figure it out together." Yara smiled again, her eyes brimming with gratitude. But Jack could see that the worry still lingered. He knew the military would be closing in on them soon, and they couldn't hide in this cave forever. "We can't stay here forever, can we?" Yara asked, her voice tinged with sadness. "No, we can't," Jack replied. "But I'll figure something out. We'll find a way to get you and Lyra somewhere safe." The conversation fell into a comfortable silence. Jack knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were many obstacles, and their situation was far from stable. But for now, in this moment, he was determined to protect Yara and her child for as long as he could. He had already made a promise to himself, and he intended to keep it. Over the next few days, Jack began to make preparations. He knew that their current hiding place wasn't safe enough in the long term. The military would be able to track them down if they stayed in one place too long. He began mapping out a route, looking for other hidden places they could reach. Yara helped when she could, though she was still physically weak from her long journey. Jack didn't mind. He had grown used to the idea that helping her meant more than just physical labor. It meant being there when she needed someone to lean on. One afternoon, as Jack was returning from scouting a new area, he saw Yara standing outside the cave, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her posture was tense, and Jack immediately knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" Jack asked, hurrying over to her. "I saw something," Yara said, her voice tight with fear. "I think it's a military patrol. They're too close." Jack's heart raced as he looked around. The forest was quiet, but he could feel the tension in the air. "How many?" he asked. "Just a few," Yara replied, "but they're heading this way." Jack's mind raced. They didn't have much time. He had to act quickly if they were going to make it out of this alive. He turned to Yara, his face hardening with determination. "Get Lyra. We need to move now." Yara nodded, her expression full of urgency. She rushed back into the cave, and Jack quickly followed her. It was time to leave the safety of the cave behind. Jack had no choice but to trust his instincts and take Yara and Lyra to the next hidden spot on the map. The rush to leave the cave was faster than Jack had ever expected. His mind raced with thoughts of military patrols closing in. Every second counted, and the fear that had been slowly building in his chest now turned into action. He had no idea how many soldiers were out there, but he knew they couldn't risk staying in one place for much longer. Yara was quick to grab Lyra and gather whatever she could carry. Her hands shook, but she didn't hesitate. Jack grabbed his own pack, filled with food, and slung it over his shoulder. He nodded to Yara as she finished, and together they began moving quickly through the forest, trying to put as much distance between themselves and the approaching patrol as possible. "Stay close," Jack whispered, his voice barely above a whisper as he led the way through the thick trees. The forest was quiet, but Jack knew it wouldn't stay that way. Every snap of a twig or rustling of leaves made his heart race. He glanced over his shoulder at Yara and Lyra. Yara's face was set in determination, but her eyes were full of worry. Lyra, too, looked scared, her small hands clutching onto her mother's shirt. Jack wanted to tell them everything would be fine, but he knew the truth. Nothing about their situation was certain. The world outside had become a dangerous place for them. But he couldn't let fear stop him. He had made a promise to protect them, and he intended to keep that promise no matter what. As they moved deeper into the forest, Jack tried to recall the map he had been studying, remembered a hidden path that led to an old abandoned mina, place he had heard about from other settlers. It was far from the settlement and hidden enough to avoid detection. It wasn't a perfect hiding place, but it would buy them some time. That's all Jack could offer for now. They reached the edge of the forest, started climbing a steep hill that led to the path. Jack's legs burned from the exertion, but he pushed forward, urging Yara and Lyra to keep up. He had to get them to safety. When they finally reached the top of the hill, Jack paused to catch his breath, peering into the distance. The path to the mine was a narrow trail, winding through thick trees and rocks. He could only hope the patrol wouldn't follow them this far. He turned to Yara. "Are you okay?" he asked. Yara nodded, though her expression was strained. "We'll make it," she said, her voice full of determination. "I trust you." Jack smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He knew it wasn't over yet. They still had a long way to go, and danger was never far behind. The journey along the trail was slow. They had to move carefully to avoid making too much noise. Jack led the way, staying alert to every sound around them. His eyes scanned the forest constantly, and his ears strained for any signs of the patrol. Every now and then he would stop to listen, his heart pounding in his chest. But for the moment, the forest remained still as the sun began to set. Casting long shadows across the trail, Jack's exhaustion started to catch up with him. He hadn't slept much since they'd left the cave, and his body was starting to feel the strain. But he pushed on, focusing on getting them to the mine before it was too late. "We're almost there," Jack said, glancing back at Yara and Lyra. Yara nodded, her face pale from the long walk, but she didn't complain. Lyra had fallen asleep. In her arms, her small face pressed against her mother's chest. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude toward Yara. Despite everything she had been through, she was strong. Stronger than he had ever imagined. When they finally reached the mine, Jack breathed a sigh of relief. It was small, hidden in a cluster of rocks, and the entrance was barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. Jack led them inside, and they huddled in the cool darkness of the old mine. "We'll stay here for the night," Jack said, his voice low. "We can rest and figure out what to do next." Yara nodded, setting Lyra down on a patch of dry ground around her daughter, and then she sat down beside her, exhausted. Jack found a spot near the entrance, keeping watch. He didn't trust the soldiers to give up easily. He knew they would be searching for them. It was only a matter of time before they figured out where they had gone. But for now, they were safe. They had made it this far. As the night grew colder, Jack settled down against the wall of the mine, his eyes never leaving the entrance. He tried to relax, but his mind was racing. He couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if the patrol found them. He wasn't trained for this kind of fight, and he couldn't let Yara and Lyra suffer because of his decision to help them. Yara's voice broke the silence, soft and calm. "Jack, can I talk to you for a moment?" Jack turned to face her. She was sitting on the ground, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her face was tired, but there was something more in her eyes. Now, something different. A quiet sadness, mixed with a spark of hope. "Of course," Jack said, moving toward her. Yara looked down at Lyra, then back up at Jack. "I know you're doing everything you can to protect us," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "And I can't thank you enough for that. But I can't keep hiding forever. Sooner or later, they'll find us. My people, what's left of them, are scattered across the galaxy. I can't let them suffer like this." Jack frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What are you saying?" Yara took a deep breath, her expression serious. I need to find them. I have to go back. If I can get word to them, maybe we can regroup. Maybe we can start over. I can't stay in hiding forever. Jack's heart sank. He didn't want to let her go, not after everything they had been through together. But he knew what she was saying was true. Her people needed her just as much as she needed them. I'll help you, Jack said quietly. I'll do whatever I can. Yara's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled softly. Thank you, Jack. You've already done so much for us. Jack nodded, knowing that their journey was far from over. But no matter what happened next, he would stand by her, just as he had promised. The morning after their conversation, Jack woke up early, his mind already filled with plans. The mine had provided them with a safe place to rest for the night, but Jack knew they couldn't stay there for long. Yara had made her decision. She wanted to find her people, to reunite with the few survivors of her species who were scattered across the galaxy. And Jack had promised to help her. As he packed up their things, Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of uncertainty. The path ahead was unclear, and the galaxy was a dangerous place. They weren't just running from the military patrols anymore. They were trying to find a way to rebuild, to create something new from the ashes of the past. Yara sat nearby, watching Jack as he worked. Lyra was still asleep, curled up in her blanket. The young child had been quiet ever since they reached the mine, and Jack couldn't blame her. This was a life no child should have to live constantly on the run, always scared of what might come next. Are you ready? Jack asked, breaking the silence as he looked up at Yara. Yara nodded, her expression determined. I have to do this, Jack. I can't just stay hidden forever. I've already lost too much. Jack understood. He had seen the pain in her eyes ever since they met, and it was clear that finding her people was her only hope of healing. But Jack also knew that helping her meant stepping into a world he wasn't prepared for. He had never imagined that his life would be tied to the fate of an alien species. Yet here he was, committed to doing whatever it took to help Yara and her child. We'll do it together, Jack said, offering a reassuring smile. I'm with you every step of the way. Yara smiled back, her eyes full of gratitude. Thank you, Jack. I don't know what I would do without you. With that, they gathered their things and set off once more. Jack led the way, keeping a close eye on the surroundings. They had to be careful. The military could be anywhere, and they had no way of knowing how far the patrols had spread. Their best chance was to stick to the less-traveled paths and move quickly. The journey took them through dense forests and across rocky hills. And although they didn't speak much, the tension between them was palpable. Jack knew that Yara was struggling with her decision. Leaving the mine had been hard for her, but she had made the choice to find her people. She had given up the safety they had briefly found in the mine, knowing that there was a bigger purpose waiting for her somewhere out there. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, they reached a small clearing. Jack paused, scanning the area for any signs of danger. The forest was eerily quiet, but that didn't mean they were safe. The silence felt heavy, like something was waiting just beyond the trees. Yara walked up to him, her eyes full of concern. Do you think we're being followed? Jack didn't want to admit it, but he knew the truth. I think it's possible, he said quietly. We need to keep moving, but we have to be careful. They decided to rest for the night in the clearing, but they made sure to stay hidden. Jack built a small fire, just enough to cook a meal, and they sat close together. Lyra had finally woken up, and she looked around at the unfamiliar surroundings with wide eyes. Yara gently brushed her hair back, whispering comforting words to her daughter. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility for them both. He had never imagined that his life would change so completely, yet here he was, committed to their safety and well-being. He couldn't leave them to face the world alone. As they ate their simple meal, Jack and Yara spoke more about their plans. Yara explained that her people had once lived on a planet far from here, a place full of beauty and life. But the war had torn everything apart, and now her species was scattered. She didn't know where the survivors were, but she had a map that might lead them to some of the other survivors. It was their best chance. I don't know if we'll find anyone, Yara said, her voice quiet. But I have to try. I can't just give up. Not when there's still hope. Jack nodded. He didn't know what the future held, but he believed in Yara's determination. She had already lost so much, and now she was fighting to rebuild. He admired her strength and resilience. and it was clear that she wasn't going to give up easily. After they finished eating, they lay down on the ground, keeping the fire low so it wouldn't attract attention. Jack stayed awake for a while, keeping watch as the night grew darker. The sounds of the forest were calming, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He knew they couldn't stay in the clearing long. They would have to move again in the morning. As the night went on, Jack's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. They had a long journey ahead of them, and the road would not be easy. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose. Helping Yara and her child was more than just a promise, it was a mission, one that could change everything for them. For a brief moment, Jack allowed himself to hope that they could make it, that they could find a way to survive in a galaxy that seemed so unforgiving. The next morning, Jack woke early. The sun was barely rising, casting a soft glow over the clearing. He quickly packed up their things and nudged Yara awake. Lyra was still asleep, curled up against her mother. Jack didn't want to disturb her. "We need to move," Jack said, his voice low. Yara nodded, still groggy but determined. "I'm ready." "Let's keep going." They set out again. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly before them. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were no longer running from something. They were moving toward something. Jack would be with them every step of the way.